Thomas Reynolds was 59 years old, and his life had become a routine. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., the same alarm, the same coffee, the same drive. Midwest Manufacturing in Detroit, 35 years of walking through those factory doors. 35 years. The same machines, humming. The same oil smell in the air. The same fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Thomas was a metal worker. His hands were calloused and scarred. His fingers had permanently shaped themselves around tools over the decades. But those hands could fix anything. At home, neighbors knew, if something broke, Thomas could repair it. Car engines, electrical wiring, plumbing, furniture, nothing stumped him. The neighborhood joke was simple. Call Thomas. He will figure it out. But at the factory, nobody noticed his skills. He was employee number 4,287. His wage was $18.50 per hour. In 35 years, it had only increased by $6. Thomas and his wife Susan lived in a small ranch house on the east side. The mortgage was finally paid off, but their retirement savings account showed $47,000. Thomas did the math at night, sitting at the kitchen table, with bills spread out. One more year until retirement. Social Security would pay $1,850 per month. Susan's part-time job at the library brought in $900. Total monthly income would be $2,750. But their house needed a new roof. The 2008 Ford in the driveway was making strange noises. Health insurance premiums kept climbing. The numbers did not add up. Thomas stared at the calculator and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. One Sunday morning in March, his grandson Dylan came over. Dylan was 14, glued to his phone like every teenager, always watching videos or texting friends. Thomas was in the garage working on a vintage brass faucet. A neighbor had brought it over. It was from the 1950s and nobody could find replacement parts anymore. Dylan wandered into the garage, thumb still scrolling. Thomas had the faucet disassembled on his workbench. Dozens of tiny pieces laid out in perfect order. Dylan looked up from his phone. The movement of Thomas's hands caught his attention. Thomas was using a miniature lathe, shaping a custom part from an old copper pipe. His movements were precise, confident, almost artistic. Dylan had seen his grandfather fix things his whole life, but he had never really watched before. Not like this. Thomas soldered the custom piece, reassembled the faucet, and tested it. Water flowed perfectly. The vintage faucet worked like new. Dylan pulled out his phone. Thomas noticed. Dylan was recording. Thomas shrugged and kept working, explaining each step without thinking about it. He had taught apprentices at the factory decades ago. Teaching came naturally. Dylan filmed for 4 minutes straight. That evening, Dylan edited the video on his laptop. He added simple text overlays explaining each step. He chose a title that felt right. 59-year-old Grandpa Fixes Impossible Vintage Faucet Master Craftsmanship. He uploaded it to YouTube at 9 p.m. Then he went to bed. The next morning, the video had 340 views. Dylan checked again at lunch. 2,800 views. By dinner, 47,000. By the time Dylan went to bed that night, the video had passed 890,000 views. Something was happening. 3 days later, the video hit 4.2 million views. Thomas was at the factory when his phone started buzzing. Susan was calling. Her voice was shaking. Thomas stepped into the break room. Susan was talking fast. The video Dylan posted had gone viral. Millions of people were watching. Thomas fixed that faucet. Thomas did not understand what viral meant. He opened YouTube on his phone during his lunch break. 4.2 million views. The comments section was flooded. People were calling him a master. A dying breed of craftsmen. They wanted more videos. They wanted to learn from him. One comment had Dudishi Virgola 000 likes. This is what the internet should be. Real skill. Real knowledge. No gimmicks. Just a master at work. Thomas sat in the break room, staring at his phone. He had spent 35 years in this factory, and nobody had ever called him a master. That weekend, Dylan came back with his phone fully charged and a plan. Thomas was fixing an old radio in the garage, a 1970s Zenith transistor radio that a neighbor found in their attic. Dylan filmed the entire repair. Thomas explained everything as he worked. He showed how to test circuits, how to replace capacitors, how to clean corrosion without damaging delicate components. Dylan posted the video Sunday night. By Tuesday morning, 2.1 million views. The comments were even more enthusiastic than before. People were begging for more content. The next weekend, Thomas repaired a 1960s Oster blender. The motor had seized after sitting in someone's basement for 40 years. Dylan filmed it. 3.8 million views in 48 hours. Then Thomas fixed an antique clock mechanism, the kind with dozens of tiny gears that most people would never dare to touch. 5.2 million views. Thomas was still going to the factory every day, clocking in at 6 a.m., clocking out at 2:30 p.m. But his evenings had changed. Instead of watching TV or staring at bills, Thomas was in the garage. Dylan would come over after school. They would find something broken and film the repair. Dylan handled all the editing and uploading. Thomas just did what he had always done. He fixed things. 2 months passed. The YouTube channel hit 340,000 subscribers. Thomas still did not fully understand what was happening, but Susan was keeping track of something else. The money. YouTube was paying them for the videos. One evening, Dylan showed Thomas the revenue report. Thomas stared at the number. $4,700 for 1 month. From videos. From doing what he did for free, in his garage anyway. Thomas felt something shift inside his chest. 6 months before retirement, he had found something new. But the story was just beginning. 3 months later, the channel had 890,000 subscribers. Companies started reaching out. Tool manufacturers wanted Thomas to use their products in videos. They offered to pay him. Some offered $3,000 for a single video featuring their tools. Thomas was confused. He had been buying these same tools his whole life. Now they wanted to pay him to use them? Dylan explained how sponsorships worked. Thomas agreed to try one. The video got 6.7 million views. The tool company came back with a bigger offer. They wanted Thomas to be a brand ambassador. They would pay him $8,000 per month, plus free tools. Thomas was making more from one YouTube sponsorship than his factory salary. Susan did the math one night. Between YouTube ad revenue, sponsorships, and affiliate links Dylan had set up, the channel was bringing in $31,000 per month. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had worried about retirement just months earlier. Everything had changed. At the factory, his supervisor called him into the office. Thomas assumed he was in trouble. Maybe someone had seen his YouTube videos and thought he was distracted at work. But the supervisor had a different message. The company had seen the videos. Corporate wanted to know if Thomas would consider being in promotional content for the company. Thomas almost laughed. For 35 years he had been employee 4,287. Now they wanted him in commercials. Thomas politely declined. He had his own platform now. 1 year after that first video, Thomas Reynolds retired from Midwest manufacturing. His retirement party was small. Cake in the break room. A plaque with his name. But Thomas was not worried about retirement anymore. The YouTube channel had 2.8 million subscribers. Monthly income was averaging $83,000. The garage had been renovated into a proper workshop with professional lighting for filming. Thomas had hired Dylan part-time to manage the business side. His grandson was making more money at 15 than most adults. But the best part was not the money. It was the messages. Every day, people wrote to Thomas. Young people who wanted to learn trades, older people who felt inspired to share their own skills, parents who watched the videos with their kids. One message stuck with Thomas. A 67-year-old man from Oregon wrote that he had been a carpenter his whole life. He thought his skills did not matter anymore. After watching Thomas, he started his own channel teaching woodworking. He was making $6,000 per month and had never been happier. Thomas realized something profound. His entire life he thought his value was tied to that factory, to that hourly wage, to that employee number. But his real value was in his hands, in his knowledge, in his ability to fix things that other people had given up on. And now, at 60 years old, he was sharing that knowledge with millions of people. The channel kept growing. Thomas started a series on restoring vintage tools, another series on fixing appliances that people thought were beyond repair. He collaborated with other creators, a 55-year-old woman who restored antique furniture, a 62-year-old man who rebuilt classic motorcycles. They called themselves the Silver Skills Squad. Their combined channels had over 12 million subscribers. Brands started creating product lines specifically for their audience. Heritage Tools launched with Thomas as the face of the brand. The revenue from that partnership alone was $240,000 per year. 2 years after that first faucet video, Thomas's net worth was $6.7 million. He owned the house outright. He had invested in real estate. He had set up college funds for his grandchildren. But he still spent most of his time in the garage. Because that was never about the money. Thomas loved fixing things. He loved teaching. He loved the idea that a 14-year-old kid with a phone had changed his entire life. Susan would watch him sometimes from the kitchen window. She would see him explaining something to the camera, his hands moving with that same confidence and precision they always had. But now millions of people were watching too. Thomas Reynolds had spent 35 years being invisible. Now at 60 years old, he was a master craftsman with a global audience. And the best part was knowing that it was not too late. Not for him, not for anyone. Because the world was full of people with valuable skills who thought nobody cared anymore. Thomas had proven them wrong. One vintage faucet at a time.